If you and I are going to understand the last week of the life of Jesus Christ, it helps us if we know something about the Garden of Gethsemane, because of course a very momentous event occurred there. That's where Jesus Christ was arrested and then taken to the various trials and then eventually crucified. The Garden of Gethsemane is on the west slope of the Mount of Olives. And so you have Mount Zion, and then you have a ravine, and then you have the Mount of Olives. What you have here, this big square, is the temple. And the temple was huge, and as you can see, it basically dominated the city. The temple's about 37 acres. This area here, south of the temple, is the traditional city of David, the old Jebusite city. And then, of course, over time it was expanded. We believe Hezekiah, for example, made this wall here. And then to the east of Mount Zion, you can see this very, very steep drop down here to what's called the Kidron Valley. And it's also sometimes called the Brook Kidron because in the rainy season, it ran with water. And then over here to the east of the Brook Kidron, this is the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives was higher in elevation than Mount Zion, which is important in biblical history for a couple of events. And by the way, in the Bible, it's never actually called the Garden of Gethsemane. John chapter 18, verse 1, after Jesus had spoken these words at the Last Supper, he went out with his disciples across the ravine of the brook Kidron to where there was a garden, which he himself and his disciples entered.
Well, here we are at the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is a traditional Garden of Gethsemane, where our olive trees here that are very, very old, but we don't know where is the site of the actual Garden of Gethsemane. Might be 100 yards, 200 yards to the south, might be 100, 200 yards to the north, might be right here, might be a little farther up the Mount of Olives, might be a little farther down in the valley of the Kidron Valley. We're not really sure. What we do know is this is close.
Now, Jesus had gone there often enough that Judas knew where to go to find Jesus when he took the Romans and the temple police, because the group that arrested Jesus was a compilation of Roman soldiers and police from the temple. That's why John 18:2 says, "Now Judas, who was betraying him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples." And then John 18:3 says, "So Judas, having received the Roman cohort and also temple police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, arrived there with lanterns and torches and weapons."
So here's Jesus Christ with his apostles, and they're in this general area, and then people are coming to arrest him. People coming from Jerusalem to arrest him, and there's the walls of Jerusalem. Now these the oldest foundation stones are from the time of Herod the Great, but the wall that you see on top is Turkish from the 1500s, but it's built on top of the wall that would have been there at the time of Christ. And the people from Jerusalem would have been walking through the gate of Jerusalem because there was a combination of both Jews and Romans.
So here comes Judas, and he's coming down to the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is one of the places that really helps us to kind of understand the geography of the Garden of Gethsemane and Mount Zion. Because the Romans and the temple police, they're going to be coming from Mount Zion. And the Garden of Gethsemane is way down toward the bottom of this ravine Kidron on the west slope of the Mount of Olives.
And so the Roman soldiers with the Jews are coming down the mountain, and you can kind of put yourself in the position of Christ and the apostles, and you're looking up the hill, and they see these torches coming at them, and they would realize that these are well-trained Roman soldiers with the Jews.
And then the story in the record in the Bible goes that Judas came down with the temple police and the Roman cohort, and Judas walked up to Jesus and kissed him, and that's how the Romans knew who to arrest when they arrested Jesus Christ. And the question would be, did Judas really have to do that? Well, if you think about it,
In those times, basically everybody's clothes was handmade, so people didn't put a lot of money in clothing unless they had a lot of money. And the result of that was that the clothing looked fairly similar. It was linen or wool, and so it had that kind of off-white color, and sometimes there'd be a brown stripe in it or something for the men. So that's basically how everybody dressed. And then basically everybody in the culture had black hair and brown eyes. So it was Passover time. There's tens of thousands of Jews camping out everywhere. How in the world are they going to find Jesus? He looks basically like everybody else. And they found Jesus Christ because Judas betrayed him with a kiss.
And God had to kind of pull a miracle off to keep the apostles out of trouble, because Peter, with all his bravado, grabbed his sword and cut off the ear of the high priest. And that could have caused real trouble if Jesus grabbed the ear and put it back on by a miracle, put it back on Malchus's head. So that's Jesus Christ coming here with his apostles to pray. Jesus Christ, this is where he prayed, God, if there's any other way, take this cup from me, right in this general area.
So that all happened in the Garden of Gethsemane, and of course, when Judas betrayed Jesus Christ, then the police and the temple guard and the Roman cohort closed in on him and arrested him and tied him up and carried him off first to Annas and then to Caiaphas, and then there were a series of trials. But what an important place in the life of Christ the Garden of Gethsemane turned out to be.